Welcome to the Turnbuckle Weekly with Chuck Carroll, talking to the biggest names in pro wrestling. This week, certainly no exception. She is the author of a brand new book coming out April 4th. AJ Mendez Brooks, known better as AJ Lee. The book, Crazy Is My Superpower. AJ, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I am doing phenomenal, and I got an opportunity to read your book here, and one of the more emotional stories in there that stood out to me was the one particular fight between your parents that you wrote about, and you wrote that you heard a gurgling sound, and then you heard your mother scream that she was being choked, and then here you are, this little child, and you bust through the door and you throw your tiny body on top of her while your father is holding this TV over his head, ready to send this thing just crashing down on her. And the amount of bravery that that must have taken for you being so young. Did you even think in that situation, or were you just reacting at that point?
I think so much of my childhood is just kind of reacting to whatever situation you're in, and like, this is what you need to do in the moment. This is, you need to step up in every moment and just, take care of yourself and take care of everyone around you. And I think my role in my family from a really young age, probably way too young, was to kind of parent everybody, even though I was the youngest in my family. And so I want to like go back and hug that little girl,
Right.
And so kind of tell, and telling these stories, and it's hard for me to reread those chapters. I kind of skip through a lot of them when I'm going back.
Sure.
And I like trust my editors to, make sure everything is kosher in there. But it's hard for me to even, talk about or go back to, but I know that I'm not alone. I'm sure that a lot of kids have been in that kind of situation. And, to me, getting that stuff out there was a way of letting it go and healing. And hopefully there's somebody else that realizes that you really shouldn't have to be that strong at that age. Yeah, that was one of the tough ones to write.
I would imagine. And when you followed that up and you said that your parents were cuddling later on that evening like nothing had happened, and your father actually commended you for standing up to him that day, that really struck a chord with me and stood out. Thinking back to that, I know that you don't like to revisit it, but thinking back to that, was that kind of surprising to you, the reaction that you got from him?
What's funny is there's so many things that as an adult, I look back at like his memories, and especially writing the book was this real therapy for me. And there were so many things that I thought was just normal. And when people grow up in violent households, the violence becomes normal to them, and screaming and yelling and breaking things, and I kind of go through that in the book too, where I'm praised for being a part of this chaotic, violent day, and so I just become this chaotic, violent child that hits everything and hits
Right.
everyone, and and then I end up in a career where I fight for a living.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting how you are so formed when you were so young, and I hope that there are parents that read the book that realize they have to be careful of just not just what they do, but what they say, and how they teach their kids what is okay and what's not, what they praise and what they don't. So I thought it was normal for a very long time, probably until I started writing the book, and like, I think I
Yeah.
should be a lot more damaged and strange than I am right now.
um, One of the things that I was thinking about when I was reading this and making some notes, knowing that I was going to talk to you, was thinking back to the documentary that UFC put together where your husband was training for his first fight, and the reluctance that you had to go and watch him train. And I'm just wondering, I could be completely wrong in this, but was some of that reluctance because of your experiences growing up and you just didn't want to be surrounded by violence anymore? Or was it more you just didn't want to see your beloved husband get his face punched in or something like that?
Gosh, I think it's a little bit of both, honestly, and that's super perceptive of you. When stuff, I've gravitated toward action that is more of the superhero, romanticized, variety, superheroes and comic books and pro wrestling, and where the fear is kind of taken out of it because there's a levity involved. And with UFC, it's so real and it's so it's violent that it's hard for me to even just watch. The pay-per-views will be on in my house, and I'll pay for it and I'll support it, and I can't really sit down and watch it. It's hard for me. So especially with my husband. It's not, I'm for someone who, beat up people for a living, I'm pretty, queasy when it comes to violence, for sure.
Speaking with former WWE Divas champion AJ Lee, now an author, AJ Brooks. Her new book, Crazy Is My Superpower, on store shelves and Amazon nowadays on April 4th. And going back, this is the last thing that I want to talk about that's a little bit dark about the book. You wrote about a particular low point in your life when you overdosed on a cocktail of antidepressants and painkillers. And the apathy that you described in the book about not caring one way or the other about whether you lived or died on that day, but you stopped short of calling it a suicide attempt. And that had to have been terrifying for you. But I also think in a lot of the same ways that we were just discussing childhood violence, I think that that's actually far more common with people with depression or other mental illnesses than a lot of people realize.
What was the hardest part about that is, to be completely honest, the first draft of my book, I didn't have that in there. And it was maybe the most formative moment of my entire life, and I was so protective of it, and I made a bunch of excuses as to why I wouldn't share it, and really at the end of the day I was just scared. And so when the book has gone through I've probably wrote it like 3 times over. I just I said I'm being very honest. I'm talking about being bipolar. I'm talking about mental health. I'm telling people to get help. I need to be honest and show them as low as someone can possibly go, and how you have to kind of pick yourself up from that and bring yourself to whatever height you can possibly get to. And so for me, that was probably the most personal and vulnerable I've been in the book. But I do consider it to, I don't want people to think that I'm not, kind of throwing it away and saying it's not a suicide attempt. It's important for people to understand there are shades of gray when you are in depression, when you don't understand what's happening. It's not easy to pinpoint and say, oh, hi, I need help right now in this moment. Like it's these moments that kind of wash over you, and you have no idea how you feel one way or the other until you're out of it. So I really wanted to capture how it can happen so fast that you might not even understand what you're doing. You might not be able to process it afterwards. But I really wanted to show that there are so many shades of gray when it comes to depression and self-harm and suicide attempts. And it's so important. That's why it's so important for people to be listening to people who are depressed and paying attention, and for hospitals and doctors to just be on their toes and really treat everything treat it as if it's the worst case scenario, because sometimes there are people like me who will just, say, okay, I got away with that one, and I wish more people had helped me. And so that's kind of my way of trying to help people who might not have someone around them, might not have that support system.